All righty, everyone, welcome. And this morning we're going to look at the ending to the book of Genesis. And it's going to be a reunion with Joseph and his brothers. Good morning. So why don't we begin with a word of prayer? Lord God, we give you thanks for the gift of another day as we gather once again in your presence to ponder your sacred words of long ago. We open our hearts to your spirit of wisdom and pray that we may be led in a direction that allows us to be more faithfully servants of you and disciples of our risen Savior, in whose name we pray. Amen. All righty. So, just a little background. So we know that Abraham is the father of the Jewish people. He has a son, Isaac. Gold star for anyone who can tell me what Isaac means in English. So Hebrew names always had a meaning to them. So Isaac means he laughs. Because when God told Abraham that his wife Sarah was going to give birth to a child, even though she was, quote, 99 years old, they laughed. And so the messenger said, since you laughed, you're going to name your child Isaac. Okay, Isaac grows up. He has twin sons, Jacob and Esau, the ultimate sibling rivalry. Jacob then has 12 sons, and they become the 12 tribes of Israel. And who was his favorite son?
Esau.
No. Pardon me? Joseph. Joseph.
Yeah. You're thinking Jacob's son.
Yeah, Jacob's son. His favorite son was Joseph. And what did his father give Joseph as a expression of his affection?
Technicolor Jacob.
Well, Technicolor, according to Andrew Lloyd Webber. Who wrote that? I know who wrote it. Was it Andrew Lloyd Webber?
He wrote them all.
Yeah, I think he wrote that when he was in college, believe it or not. Mm-hmm. But so Jacob gives his son a coat of many colors. All the other brothers get jealous. They throw Joseph into a pit and they're going to kill him. But then they decide that instead of doing that, they're going to sell him to a band of traveling Ishmaelites. And so they sell Joseph as a slave. And where does Joseph end up? Egypt, that's right. And he is purchased by an officer in Pharaoh's army, Gold Star, who, for anyone who can tell me the name of the officer, the general, whatever it was. Potiphar. And so Potiphar's wife thinks that Joseph's kind of cute. And so she starts flirting with him and he wants nothing to do with it. And so what does Potiphar's wife do? She tells her husband that Joseph tried to take advantage of her. That's putting it euphemistically. Joseph ends up getting thrown into prison. And how does Joseph get out of prison? Mm-hmm. Joseph has a gift. It is the ability to interpret dreams. And, I'm sharing all of this and I'm realizing in order for the sermon to make sense, I'm going to have to give this background information.
Yeah.
So Pharaoh has a dream. And in the dream, he sees 7 fat cows.
The Pharaoh?
Yeah, the Pharaoh, the king of Egypt, has a dream. He sees 7 fat cows. And then he sees 7 skinny cows. He doesn't know what it means, and none of his wise men are able to interpret the dream. Suddenly, somebody in the Pharaoh's court says, hey, there's a guy in one of your prisons who can interpret dreams. So Pharaoh sends for Joseph, and Joseph interprets the dream. What is the meaning of the dream?
7 million years.
That's right. Gold star for dawn. It means that Egypt is going to have 7 years of bountiful harvests, and it's going to be followed by 7 years of drought. And so Joseph says, if the king is wise, he will store up all the grain during the bountiful years so that there's plenty of grain for the lean years. And so Pharaoh is so impressed that he basically makes Joseph number 2 in command of the kingdom. And so there's a famine throughout the land.
It happened 7 years later.
According to what we were told. And guess who comes to Egypt looking for food?
His brothers.
Look at where Joseph is now. Joseph has every means and motive and opportunity to get his revenge. So we will see what actually Joseph does.
When Joseph's brothers saw that their father was dead, they said, "It may be that Joseph will hate us and pay us back for all the evil that we did to him." So they sent a message to Joseph saying, "Your father gave this command before he died. Say to Joseph, 'Please forgive the transgression of your brothers and their sin, because they did evil to you. And now, please, forgive the transgression of the servants of the God of your father.'" Joseph wept when they spoke to him. His brothers also came and fell down before him and said, "Behold, we are your servants." But Joseph said to them, "Do not fear, for am I in the place of God? As for you, you meant evil against me, but God meant it for good, to bring it about that many people should be kept alive, as they are today. So do not fear, I will provide for you and your little ones." Thus he comforted them and spoke kindly to them.
And they all lived happily ever after. So what do you think of all of this?
The in practice of last week's, no, I say 70 upon 70 times.
Okay. So you're connecting it back to last Sunday's scripture and sermon where Peter says, how many times shall I forgive my brother when he sins against me? 7 times. And Jesus says, no, not 7 times, but 77 times. And there are actually some ancient manuscripts that have the wording there slightly different. That makes it even more. 70 times 7. 70 times 7, yeah. No, 70 times is you always forgive, you know. And as we talked last week, forgiveness is really much about you as well as the other person. And so, yes, what we see here is a Joseph who forgives his brothers. I find some interesting things in this story. Verse 16 and 17, they send a message to Joseph saying, your father gave this command before he died. You're supposed to forgive us. Did he really?
Yeah, I saw that.
We don't know. We don't know. It could be that the brothers are being manipulative, or it could be that it definitely is what Jacob wanted.
Most parents, if their kids are fighting, want him to
Right. Right, exactly. That thought went through my mind as well, Leslie, is that, you know, the worst thing for a parent is to see their kids fighting with one another and not having a relationship with one another. So it isn't out of the realm of possibility that Jacob did.
And you've mentioned in 1 or 2 situations with somebody's out where the family comes together and they are a fighting family. And there seems to be a reconciliation or a communication once they've come together.
And
After the death of the parent.
oh, yeah, I've seen that
Yeah.
a number of times over the years. What I will say is that difficult times can bring a family together or tear it apart.
And I've seen that.
Oh, I've seen that too.
Yeah.
I have definitely seen that. When it's the death of a parent, you know what it's usually about?
Money.
Money.
Oh, God. I have a family right now going through that.
Yeah.
Have you seen the ad on television where the lawyer is reading out the will and everything goes to the cat?
Oh, no. Everything goes to the kitty cat. Uh-huh.
That must be a cat food commercial.
It was.
Oh, was it really? Oh.
But they also gave him the camp.
The what?
On the water, all the beautiful camp and everything by the
Oh,
water.
the cat got that too? Of course, in a situation like that, I suppose you could contest the will and the basis of the person not being of sound mind. Yeah, so there's that aspect of it. You know, so yes, Joseph forgives his brothers.
Do you think if Joseph's life had turned out so nice, he would be so?
That's a good question. So here's Joseph. Joseph has lived a roller coaster existence. You know, he's the favorite to being in prison, to being on top again. And the question that you raised, Leslie, is a valid one. Let's suppose that the brothers find Joseph in Egypt and he's a janitor. Well, if that's the case, they're not going to be as afraid of him. And the question is, does Joseph forgive them? So what do you think?
I don't know. I was thinking that's such a nasty, like my kids caught a lot sometimes.
Yeah.
Like nobody ever stole anybody.
Nobody ever, yeah. It's one thing to,
It's pretty drastic and nasty. And
yeah.
like what about the parents? Like did they go looking for him?
Well, but they lied to Joseph.
Oh, that's.
I mean, they lied to Jacob.
Oh, yeah.
So you remember what they do?
They said he was dead.
Yeah.
He was dead. And they fell down.
Mhm.
Well,
They kill a lamb and they smear the blood of the lamb on the coat of many colors. And they go to the father and say, oh, we got some bad news for you. Brace yourself. Joseph is no more. Which then makes you wonder, and I'm going to have to go back and do some checking on this. I think Jacob was alive when the brothers went down to Egypt.
It just says the
It
opposite.
said, in verse 15.
Yeah, but this,
When they left, he was.
yeah, they were there for a while.
Yeah, they were.
So
He sent them there, if I remember.
I think Jacob sends them
Yes.
to Egypt to see if there's any food down there.
Yes.
So the father dies at some point in the progression of events here. And obviously by this point, he is definitely dead. But, you know, it's a good, go ahead.
I see a current day comparison, Mandela.
Oh, Nelson Mandela? Okay, how do you see that similar to this?
Look at, he's in jail, he's out of jail, he's useful to the people, he's put down upon, he's tortured.
He was in jail for a long time. How long was it?
I want to say 30 years.
It wouldn't surprise me if it was 30 years. Yeah. And
then he became president.
yeah.
He tried to be a fair president for like.
Yes, he did. Yeah. What was the movie Invictus? You know, which was an amazing movie about integrating the South African rugby team. Rugby team. Yeah. Matt Damon was in it, wasn't he? Yeah. It was a great movie. By the way, great movies. As an aside, when I was up in Maine, it rained one day. I went and saw Oppenheimer.
Oh, I saw that.
It's an excellent movie. Excellent movie. it's 3 hours long, but I don't know about you, but I didn't find it.
I didn't find the 3 hours to be long. The one thing about the movie that kind of got to me is every scene was like 4 seconds long. They kept flipping scenes.
Yeah, they were going back and forth from present day to previous. Yes.
And
Yeah.
I think they needed more
Yeah,
time
yeah,
on some of those scenes. to
The reason why I thought of the movie is because there's a general who's in charge of the Manhattan Project, and it was only about halfway through the movie that I finally realized it was Matt Damon.
that Hughes the general.
Yeah,
Oh, you didn't know that actor was Matt Damon?
that was Matt Damon. I didn't realize because he gained so much weight for the movie.
Right.
I
And
got-
he looked older.
Oh my gosh, he did. But anyways, yes, so Nelson Mandela, absolutely. And I remember a quote from him, something to the effect that when he was finally released from prison, he said, I'm not going to hold a grudge, because just because, how did he put it? He basically said, don't hold the grudge, because if you do, even though you're out of that prison, you're still going to be in their chains.
You're still in prison,
Yeah. And so, but here's,
I'm not advocating forgiveness, but I just noticed that the brothers never really apologized.
no, the brothers,
They said, our Father says you
Right.
should forgive us,
mhm.
but they don't. I mean,
And-
they
and you know what's-
holy are your servants, but
Yeah.
they don't come and give a heartfelt apology.
There isn't one in here.
We were really jealous.
Yep, there is.
Best of us.
We see no heartfelt apology. And in fact, Joseph even calls them out on that. Look in verse 20. As for you, you meant evil against me. Okay. So he on one level, Joseph is saying, let's not kid ourselves here. I'm forgiving you, but let's not forget, what you did and why you did it. But
That's something, because, I mean, if you look at this in like a domestic violence
Mhm.
lens or whatever, I mean, you have to be careful, because battered spouses
Mhm.
just keep getting battered and say, oh, I forgive you, but
Yeah.
I think, do you have to hold people I think you can forgive people and still hold them accountable for their actions.
oh, sure.
Always.
So I
Forgiveness
think
does not
kinda-
mean,
Yeah, it's not like just a little who I bumped him when he was right.
So your example,
But, if it's something big, you have to say, you really screwed up.
Yeah.
you know?
So domestic violence, I remember many years ago, I went to a workshop at Andover Newton Theological School. And the guy who was leading the workshop on domestic violence said something that I will never forget. And what he was doing is he's saying, in cases where abusers are in prison or something like that, or even in therapy, they'll say things like, well, I wouldn't hit her except, if she did this, I wouldn't have to hit her. Things like that. And the guy leading the workshop said, there's an old Mexican proverb. It doesn't matter if the glass hits the rock or the rock hits the glass. It's the rock's fault. In other words, there's no excuse for hitting.
Right.
It's the rock's fault.
Mhm.
Okay. And that's absolutely true. So, Jesus said, turn the other cheek. Okay. He didn't rule out the possibility that you turn the other cheek and you take a step back so you're out of swinging range. Absolutely. And people who are in abusive relationships, they need to get out of them, absolutely. But there's something else going on here that makes it possible for Joseph to forgive. Or let me put it this way, let me put it more broadly. There's something going on here that makes it possible for Joseph to go on with his life.
Well, after interpreting the dream and being given the job, he's helping a lot of people. He's got to do that.
He's helping a lot of people. Okay, so he's in a position where he has a responsibility for basically an entire kingdom.
And God changed it.
Oh, God
Right.
changed it.
Through his ability from God to interpret the dreams.
Okay.
God changed what they made a bad thing, God made a good thing.
Okay, so I hadn't made that connection, but who was it that gave Joseph the ability to interpret dreams? God. Okay.
I was just gonna say, he has faith in God,
Mm-hmm.
and that also makes a big difference, I think.
Just making a note here.
Faith helps you. If you believe, then.
Okay, so so Joseph has faith in God, and as we've said many times, actually it was a sermon during the summer that I gave on the book of Genesis, where faith in God always depends on your relationship with God. And too many people think that faith is like a light switch. You just flip it on and off. No, faith in God always starts with your relationship with God. And the stronger your relationship with God is, the more you will be able to have faith in God.
That relationship with God, a lot of people confuse that God's there to ask things up, not to thank.
Say again, please.
God is there to provide for you, to ask things up. Never,
Oh,
what do I do for God?
yeah.
It's
So-
always a one-way relationship.
Sometimes, some relationship with God is all one way. Mm-hmm. And definitely that is not a healthy.
And in this world, we have that me concept, so that goes along with that unhealthy relationship.
Yeah, we live in a me society, and so that gets projected into relationship with God. And we make God in our image. In fact, I read an article just a few weeks ago, and I wish I could remember the man's name, but he used to be an executive in the Southern Baptist Convention, and he's now pastoring a local church. And he talked about giving a sermon on turning the other cheek. And actually, I think he said he's heard this from other pastors as well. And people will come to the pastors, and when they hear things like turn the other cheek and everything like that, and they'll ask their pastors, where are you coming up with all of this woke doctrine? Seriously. And the pastor will say, it's in the Sermon on the Mount, the ultimate teaching of Jesus. How sad is it that the Sermon on the Mount is being politicized and, determined as being woke? What my expression is? Better woke than a winkle.
Mine is wake up.
Or wake up. Well, see, I see some of what's happening in our country as this desire to turn the clock back 30, 40 years to the way it used to be. Okay, sort of like Rip Van Winkle being asleep for 30 years and waking up. So my expression is, I would rather be woke than a winkle. Yeah. So Joseph has faith in God, and you're absolutely right, because look what he says in 20. Yeah. As for you, you meant evil against me, but God meant it for good, to bring it about that many people should be kept alive as they are today. And the working title for the sermon Sunday is The Ultimate Lemonade Maker. Okay, you know the expression, when life gives you lemons, What are you supposed to do?
Make lemonade.
Make lemonade, okay.
And some vodka.
Say again?
And then add some
Oh, and then add some vodka. Okay, I had not heard that expression. Okay, I don't know if I can work that into the sermon, but God is the ultimate lemonade maker. Okay,
Well,
God has a plan. That's I think where I'm going. So God can take the negatives and turn them into positives. God can take those lemons and turn them into lemonade because God always has a plan for you. I mean, think about it. How many people would say, yeah, God has a plan for me?
I'm not a fatalist either.
I'm not a no. Okay, good point. So, yeah, God has a plan, but you always have the option of getting with the plan. Okay. So, for example, Joseph had the freedom to take revenge on his brothers. Okay. He could have done that. He had all the power. He could have had them thrown into prison and thrown the key away, but he didn't. And that's because of his faith. And he saw God taking these lemons and making lemonade out of them. God has a plan for everyone. And I'm going to give a number of examples of that. And it isn't just people in high places, it's a plan for every single person.
Being a consummate Pollyanna, which
Yeah.
I am, I think that God takes lemons and you make lemonade out of it means you actively act on what God gave you the opportunity for rather than the plan for.
Oh,
God
sure.
gives you opportunities forever. You
Mhm.
have to act on them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I guess the Pollyanna in me says, well, God always gives you a good opportunity, you just need to find it.
You just have to find it. I would agree. And I would say that the more you work on your faith, the more you're able to find it.
That's how you find it.
Yeah, that's how you find it. I'm trying to think, who was it that said, I want to say it was David Ben-Gurion, but I'm not sure if it was the first prime minister of Israel. Someone once said something in fact, the more I pray, the more I see miracles. Okay? Because you're so tuned in. Okay? And what happens is those coincidences suddenly aren't just coincidence, it's the hand of God, in there as well. Some of you have heard this story, I know, but when my mother passed away, that I saw God's plan in macaroni and cheese. I don't know, have you heard this story? I don't think so. So, my mother died of a disease called bronchiectasis. I'd never heard of it before. And I remember talking to Karen Weberg one day, and she knew what it was because she's a nurse practitioner. So essentially, your bronchial tubes are supposed to be smooth. And my mother's were pitted. And so what would happen is little drops of water would get into these pits and she would have these coughing fits. We always attributed it to nerves, but it was this disease. We also know in retrospect, I shouldn't say no, we're pretty sure in retrospect, back in 1968, she was diagnosed with tongue cancer. And, here's the part that also, coincidences, plan. So her tongue cancer was caught very early, fortunately, because we went to Vermont for vacation and she got bit by a black fly and her neck swelled up. And so they did tests and everything. And they found that the lymph nodes, there was detected cancer. So they gave her cobalt radiation. This was back in the late 60s. They didn't have it as refined as they do now. And I can still remember as a kid growing up, my mother with radiation sickness, retching in the middle of the night. Well, they cured her cancer, But in doing that, they damaged her bronchial tubes. No, we can't complain because she got another 40 years of life.
That's
Okay.
my brother, the exact same thing.
Yeah.
Dick had the throat cancer, and when they did the radiation
Mhm.
about 5 years ago,
Mhm.
5 years ago, they discovered, because they could track it better,
Yep.
and they had to put the radiation as far as it went. So that burned down
Sure.
through
Yeah.
his throat. Yeah.
So because of this, my mother couldn't eat. She was getting thin and thin. And she was just 4'11". She wasn't a big woman. And so for the last 4 months of her life, she was on a feeding tube. And, I'm thinking of all of these little coincidences. Another one is when she was in the hospital for the first time, right after Thanksgiving, she said, I remember she told me one night when I went to visit her, she said, "Oh, I had a terrible nightmare." And I said, "Really?" And she said, "Yes." She said, "You and your father were out in the hall talking to the doctor, and I was lying here in the bed. And the doctor said to you and your father, she only has 4 months to live." And my mother said she was, in the bed, and she couldn't talk. And she said, "I wanted to scream. I'm here. I'm here." And she died 4 months later.
Crazy.
Yep. So when,
Where's
Um,
the mac and cheese coming?
yep. So a couple weeks before she passed away, my father and I went to visit her. She was back in the hospital. She'd been in a nursing home for a while. And she was very weak. The nurse was doing something, and my mother was lying in bed. Her eyes weren't even open. And so she was just talking, and she suddenly said, "Oh, I had supper last night." And my father and I looked at her, and we said, "You did?" And she immediately realized that what she said didn't make any sense because she had a feeding tube. And so she said, "Oh, I must have dreamt it." And I said, "Oh." I said, "What did you have to eat in your dream, Mother?" And she said, "Macaroni and cheese." Fast forward the clock a week and a half later, and it's November 4th. It's 20 minutes of 6 at night. My father had gone home because she was in her final stages. She's on morphine. She had the death rattle and all of that. And I was determined that she wasn't going to be alone. So suddenly I realized I hadn't eaten all day. So I went out to the nurse's station and I said, "Would it be possible to order something from the cafeteria and have it brought up? Because she could go at any minute." And the woman behind the desk said, "Oh, absolutely." She said, "I'll be in a minute with a menu." So, this point is 5:45, and February 4th, so it was dark outside. There was one single floor lamp in the room that was on. Okay. So I took the menu, I went over to the floor lamp so I could read the menu better. I was looking at it for maybe 15, 20 seconds, and I said, "Of course, you have to get the macaroni and cheese." And I turned around and she was gone. God has a plan.
So you said that out loud?
What?
Or, that I had?
No, I said to myself, I was the only one in the room.
Right.
Okay. Some people say that's a coincidence. I see it as a God who always has a plan. God was saying to me, "You know what? She's with me now. You'll see her again, and go in peace, so to speak." I see too many examples of this.
Jess and I went to the same
Yeah,
thing.
yeah.
So she started her morphine, and they said, "Oh, she could go in a matter of hours."
Yeah,
And she lasted another week.
yeah.
And so I talked to you, and you said, "You have to tell her that it's okay to go."
I said sometimes that's what they need to do. Yep.
And so I came back and I told her that early, the very next day
Mhm.
after they said a few hours.
Mm-hmm.
And she shook her head.
Mm.
She shook her head, adamantly no.
No, yeah.
She didn't want to hear that. She was
Yeah.
going to let go. And I was crying when I said it.
Yeah.
Because I don't know how much I really meant it.
Yeah.
You know, I don't want you to go.
Oh, sure.
Rick
Oh.
told me.
Oh, I knew somehow it was going to come back to be my fault.
You're the rock. You're the rock. I'm the glass.
Yeah, right. I'm the rock and you're the glass.
So
Now, in fairness, what I'm sure I said, because I've been in this situation many times, is that, you know, sometimes what the person needs is to hear you say it's okay to go.
right, and
I never tell people what to do because it come back and bite me. Yep.
But I'm sure when I said it, I didn't sound sincere because I
Yeah.
wasn't at the time.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
know, it was
Sure.
hard for me to say.
Sure.
But then a week later, she's still alive.
Yeah.
I maintained a blog, and everybody
Mhm.
probably remember that. And that night, I was in the room with her, and then I came back and I write in the waiting room. I'm typing. I told her, you know, I want her to go. You know, I want her to let go. And I just finished typing that when my friend Christine, who's in the room with Jess, came running into the waiting room saying, Jess has opened her eyes. So I came running in there and I saw her, I was hugging her, and that's when she let go.
Wow.
She passed
Yeah.
away.
So she opened her eyes.
Her eyes were open, looking at me.
Not a coincidence.
Right.
God has a plan.
Right, and I swear that she heard me type that.
God always has a plan.
Right.
Absolutely. And I thought of the quote that I was trying to think of, and it was David Ben-Gurion. David Ben-Gurion, the first prime minister of Israel, once said, anyone who doesn't believe in miracles isn't a realist. Yeah, I think it absolutely makes sense. And, you know, there are just so many examples of God taking lemons and making lemonade. You have to be on board with the plan, though. And the more you have a faith that is solid, the more you can get on with the, or what's the word I'm trying to think of? Get on board with the plan is what I'm trying to think of. You know, I can remember Nancy Crandall. And Nancy Crandall was our music director many years ago. And she was teaching somewhere in the area, and the end of the school year, they cut her position. And so she spent the summer looking for another job and everything. And it was like a week before school was to start, and she didn't have a job. And I said, you know, aren't you worried? And she said, no, not really. She said, God has something lined up for me, just taking a little longer to get the pieces in place. And sure enough, the first week of school, she got a phone call from a superintendent someplace in Worcester. And it was a better job until they changed it and put a lot of pressure on her. But I always remember her saying, you know, God has a plan. It's just taking a little time to get the final pieces in place.
Sometimes you think you're gonna make orange juice.
Say again?
Sometimes you think you'll make orange juice or limeade, but then you use lemons and you have to make lemonade.
I'm not following. I'm sorry.
You sometimes think, I'm gonna do this.
Oh, I'm gonna do this.
And it doesn't happen. But then something else happens.
Yep.
And you're like,
Yep.
oh, this isn't even,
Yeah.
it's
Yep.
just good,
Yep.
it's better, or
Right.
I never even thought I could do that, look at me now.
Yep. So when you,
I was a lemonade sort of person.
well, you know, when
I was
it's
an orange juice person, and then look at me. I'm
Yeah.
making lemonade, you know?
yeah. And, you know, as I think about this, when you don't have faith, it can lead you in a whole different direction. Okay. So when you get those lemons, okay, you get caught up in anger. You know, this isn't fair. I don't deserve this. Feel sorry for yourself, or it can kind of distance you from people. So the more you have faith, the more you're able to believe and understand that God does have a plan for everyone. I agree with you, Leslie, that it isn't a forced plan. Let's put it this way. You always have the option to go with the plan or to opt out. This is one of the reasons, by the way, that I am not a believer in universal salvation. Universal salvation says it doesn't matter what you do here in life. Ultimately, God is going to get you to heaven. And so my response to that is, what if I don't want to go to heaven? I have that right as a human being, don't I? So you're telling me that I have to go even if I don't want to? And the other aspect of universal salvation that I don't go along with is, if there are no consequences, why be a good person now?
There's lots of fun.
Yeah.
Yeah. Son to go through everything he went through, if it didn't matter.
Yeah, it didn't matter.
I mean, it takes a lot to like sacrifice a kid to save everybody else, but if it didn't even matter, like, why the heck would you
Right.
everything to do it,
Exactly. Yes, Don.
Faith is a support system. You make a stronger support system the more you
Faith is a
practice your
support
faith.
system.
You make a stronger support system the more you practice your faith.
Yes. Although, as you were talking, I immediately thought of the former governor of Minnesota.
Hubert Humphrey.
No, much later than that. Jesse Ventura,
Oh,
who was
Yeah.
an atheist, and he said that people who have faith are weak, and they use it as a crutch.
It takes a lot of strength, in my opinion.
Exactly.
Oh,
Exactly.
When you're in hard times, and it takes a lot of strength to get through those hard times.
Yeah.
Or let's put it this way. It isn't easy following Jesus. It isn't easy forgiving sometimes. It isn't easy turning the other cheek. It isn't easy going the extra mile. It isn't easy being your brother and your sister's keeper. Okay. So, pardon me?
Like we were just saying, like the me society, and Jesus says, put everybody else before you.
Mhm.
That's not always easy.
Yep.
Like, what about me?
I can remember I had a classmate in high school who wasn't a person of faith. And when he told me that, I was shocked. And when I asked why, he said, I don't want to be a part of any organization that says you have to be a doormat.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking to myself, you just didn't get the message.
Yeah.
Yes, it says to be meek, but meek does not mean weak. It means just the opposite.
When I said support system, a support system doesn't do it for you.
No.
Support means support, not doing it for you. And I think people, support, they'll do it for me. Which goes back to what I said before.
Mhm.
Expecting God to do things for you. God provides the opportunities. God may open the door, but you still have to walk through it. You have to make
still
the
have to.
effort yourself.
Mm-hmm. Yep. What's the
two biggest things, mistakes people make, like if they're like didn't grow up in a church and they're trying it out, is to think that if they believe their life will then be easy. And also that once you say, like, I believe in Jesus, like, that you know everything. Because obviously you spend your life learning everything, nobody expects you to know everything either.
Yeah. So the kind of the flip side of that, I remember an old Doonesbury cartoon. Wish I had saved it. And it shows a husband and wife, and they're sitting in a pastor's office, and it's, of course, this is back before the internet and all of that. And they're doing church shopping. And the wife turns to the husband and says, let's go back to the church down the street, dear. They only have 8 commandments and they have a basketball court. And that's a faith of convenience as opposed to commitment. The other thing that just popped into my head is a family was church shopping and they're going home after the service. And as they're sitting in the car, father, mother, daughter, son, The mother said, or no, the father says, well, we're not going back there. That sermon was boring. And the mother said, yeah, and the people were just so unfriendly. And the daughter says, yeah, and the choir sounded horrible. And the brother says, gee, I don't know. I thought it was a pretty good show for $1. No, you're right. You're all right. God has a plan, but that doesn't mean God's going to do everything for you. And you have to actively get on board with the plan. And the more you have faith, the more you are able to understand what that plan is, the more you're able to do what Joseph did. So, all righty, everyone. And thank you all.
Thank you.
Now I just have to go and write it.
James, what's your title for this?
The ultimate